when I was asked by Michelle to do this, I said to the team, I've been invited to do BSides, and they said, no way are you going to stand up in front of a technical audience and talk about cybersecurity. So there is no way I'm talking about cybersecurity. I am based in Scotland. We have got a very small team called the Cyber and Fraud Centre. One of our ex-ethical hackers is here, somewhere in the audience, and has got a job in Belfast. So we work with ethical hackers, but we've got 25 to 27 part-time ethical hackers to do loads of work for us, and they're based at Abertay University. But as I said, I'm not going to talk about cybersecurity today. I'm going to talk about something that really bugged me for the last few years when I heard when people stop themselves from doing things, they're taking projects forward, they're going for the next job, and they said, I've got imposter syndrome. I think I might have a bit of it after the last presentation. So if I see you all leaving halfway through, you know that I'm not good enough. Hands up for people in the audience who do say that they have imposter syndrome. Keep your hands up. Interesting. So most of the women, am I right, in the audience have imposter syndrome? Yeah. And about half of the men, or maybe even a quarter of the men. Put your hands up again. Actually, yeah, less than a quarter of them. Not very many men at all. So, here we go. I thought that imposter syndrome was something that had been invented over the last few years, and then everyone jumped in the bandwagon. But from looking into the history and psychology of it further, it looks like it's something like skipping ropes, hula hoops, hopscotch, that come back into playgrounds, etc., every few years. So maybe they haven't come back into playgrounds in a long time, but that's what it used to be when we were kids, is somebody bringing a hula hoop, and then it was everybody had to get a hula hoop. Back in the 1970s, two psychologists in the US, Pauline Clance and Suzanne Imes, were also puzzled by this phenomenon. And they came up with the idea of imposter syndrome to explain it. Clance and Imes published their classic paper that introduced the world to imposter syndrome in 1978. They interviewed 150 high-achieving women. I think of those dates in the stats. So 1978, 150 high-achieving women. Think how hard it would be to get 150 high-achieving women in 1978, or actually women who would say that they were high-achieving, because even in this day, not many women will say, I'm a high-achieving woman. They interviewed the women. Despite the tangible and independent evidence of their ability, the women consistently played down and generally minimized their accomplishments and attributed their success to luck or to other people overestimating them. The phrase imposter syndrome really took off. The research was done in the mid-1970s and was a product of its time. And just like ABBA, punk rock, and Bay City Rollers, the phrase imposter syndrome soon became part of a popular culture. It took hold because it offers an interesting, straightforward explanation for the feelings of anxiety, self-doubt that we all experience when asked to do a difficult task. Clance and Imes described imposter syndrome as being a pattern of doubting one's accomplishments and fearing being exposed as a fraud. Now let's look at the psychology of imposter syndrome. Imposter syndrome is a specific psychological process. It begins when you're given a task you don't feel quite ready for. You start to experience feelings of anxiety, self-doubt, and worry. You could respond to these feelings in a number of ways. You could become obsessed with the task and over-prepare, or avoid the task and procrastinate. It's like me preparing for things like this. When you get the task done, you experience relief and maybe even a brief feeling of accomplishment. This is usually short-lived, because then you start to think about the task and come to the perfectly reasonable conclusion that the outcome had very little to do with the innate ability you might have, or you pick over every little detail of it. Like when I do an TV interview, it's like an absolute post-mortem. Everybody else is sending me text going, you did really well. I'll watch it. I'll look over. I said that one word in a big long sentence, that means completely the wrong thing. And then I'd start looking at my forehead and say, I need Botox. My 16-year-old daughter tells me Botox is preventative, and I'm way past that stage. So yeah, I feel rather good about myself after an interview. If I over-prepared for the interview, then a successful outcome was obviously a result of the overwork rather than my personal ability. If I avoided and procrastinated and it all worked out fine, the success was down to luck and the fact that I had to wing it. So whether you or I procrastinate or over-prepare, any positive feedback is of being a fraud becoming stronger and the corresponding fear of being found out feeding this negative feedback loop. Has anyone ever felt like that? Okay, men and women. So, why is the idea of imposter syndrome flawed? The actual phrase imposter syndrome is misleading. An imposter is a person who pretends to be someone else to deceive others, usually to defraud them. The experience of the person with imposter syndrome is the reverse of this. In imposter syndrome, it's usually other people reassuring the person with imposter syndrome that they are good at their job, with the person finding it difficult to believe this and trying to hide their lack of confidence. The word syndrome means a set of medical signs and symptoms that occur together and are associated with a particular disease or condition. Imposter syndrome isn't, by any stretch of any imagination, a disease, psychological or otherwise. So those of you who raised your hands to say that you did have imposter syndrome, do you still raise your hands to say you've got imposter syndrome? 2. And the women have got their hands down. Okay, we've still got some more work to do on 2 of you. What can you do about the feeling of being an imposter? If you experience a loss in confidence in certain situations or with certain people, here are a few ideas about what you can do to regain your temporary loss of confidence. 1, edit your story. If you're prone to imposter syndrome, edit your story to say that most people find difficult situations tough. It's normal. It's a way of life. It's normal to feel like an imposter some of the time. However, with practice and persistence, most people get over it. Tell yourself that you know from your own personal experience that when you start something new, it's often very difficult, but becomes easier with time and practice. Who here has started a new job in the last, say, year? Did you find it easy or difficult? I bet you all found it difficult, and you all sat there going, somebody's going to catch me out, I don't know what I'm doing. You're not supposed to know. You're not supposed to get a job and know exactly what you're supposed to do. Secondly, we see the world from the inside out. People are very surprised when they find out that I'm nervous before events like this, TV interviews, or even meeting new people. Always remember that you observe the world and other people from the inside out. When you do anything challenging, you will be aware of what is going on around you. However, you will also be painfully aware of all your faults, your shortcomings, and your self-doubt. On the other hand, you only see other people from the outside. You see the face they choose to present to the world. It's easy to see other people as being all confident and yourself as being full of doubt, but that isn't true. The next time you're in a situation when you feel like an imposter or feel that you're not good enough, remember that you are only aware of your own feelings and not the feelings and the psychological state of others around you. Maybe they feel as scared as you. Third, feelings do not equal facts. Towards the end of his life, Albert Einstein said to a friend, "The exaggerated esteem in which my life work is held makes me very ill at ease. I feel compelled to think of myself as an involuntary swindler." So if you sometimes feel like an imposter, you're in very good company. Objectively, Albert Einstein was a genius, and yet he thought of himself as an involuntary swindler. Just because you feel like an imposter, it doesn't necessarily follow that you are an imposter. When you feel like this, take a deep breath and think of some objective evidence that proves that you are not an imposter. Look at your CV. Look at the qualifications you've gained. Remember that an interview panel appointed you, not anybody else, you to do the job and chose you over other people. People have mentored you. People have brought you along. People have given you time and advice to help you in your career. Assess then whether you are really an imposter on this tangible evidence, not emotion. Apply for the job that you only know how to do 70% of, because learning is not imposter syndrome. You will learn the other 30%. I get CVs all the time, and I can guarantee you, going back to the show of hands in this room, the amount of CVs that I get from men who maybe even only have like 30% of the skills. Some people, for cybersecurity jobs, there's people who've got telecoms experience and they think they can be an ethical hacker or a pen tester or CREST accreditation. They just ignore that bit and they go and they apply for the job. Any CVs, and also the lack of CVs that we get for women in cybersecurity, because they'll look at the job and they'll go, I don't know 100% of this job. I might get away with 95%. I don't want people with 95% of the job that they're going to do. I want them to come in. I want them to learn, and I want them to learn for the next few years. And I know I probably only have people for about 5 years learning new things and doing different things. I don't want people that are going to come in and just do the same thing as they've done in their last job. Number 4, aim to be good enough rather than perfect. And perfectionists look at me at times and go, what do you mean you don't need it to be perfect? We don't need perfectionism in every single thing that we do. There will be things that need to be perfect, but not everything needs to be perfect. The biggest tip on avoiding imposter syndrome is to strive to be good enough rather than be perfect. When I had my first child 19 years ago, I thought everything had to be perfect. And this was even before social media, which I'm lucky. Now when I look at Instagram, you have all these moms who think that, they have to have the children in the best clothes and, shiny faces and shiny holidays and glass of champagne on a Friday night and stuff. I didn't have any of that, but I still had something that I had to aim for perfectionism to be a mother, probably because I looked at other people. I know my own mother wasn't a perfect mother, but it wasn't, or even like had a perfect house or anything. I don't know where it came from. What I wanted at the time was I wanted a perfect house. Everything had to be perfect. The baby in a perfect routine, home-cooked dinners. And a few weeks into motherhood, my dad said to me, there's nothing wrong with staying in your PJs all day and ordering a chippy for tea. It was his way of saying, loosen the hell up, Jude, and forget about being perfect. It took me a while to take this advice, but yet again, my dad was right. Donald Winnicott was a psychoanalyst and a paediatrician who worked in London in the 1950s. He found that many mothers who became depressed would say that they wanted to be the perfect mother. Mothers who didn't experience depression just did their best to look after their children and be good enough. Winnicott concluded that perfectionism leads to depression. Ultimately, perfection is impossible, and being unable to settle for anything less than perfection will always lead to disappointment. You can set yourself an impossible task. Winnicott said, we should all just do the best we can with the gifts we have and aim to be good enough, rather than perfect, which is good advice for everything in life, not just around motherhood. So can I ask now, for a show of hands from the two guys, do you still think you've got imposter syndrome? Oh my God. I'm down to 1. Am I down to 1? 1.5? 2? Oh God. I'm usually 0 at this time. So, to wrap things up, and we'll forget about these two guys that they still will ask again at the end. I don't normally do this. My name is Jude for Saint for Hopeless Cases. So I've got 2 of them today to work on. So to wrap things up, I want to leave you with these thoughts. Imposter syndrome is a myth because people who suffer with it are not imposters, and it's not a medical syndrome or condition. Imposter syndrome happens when vulnerability inside us becomes triggered by certain context. We experience a temporary loss of self-confidence in certain situations or with certain people that we put ourselves on a pedestal against. Imposter syndrome affects women more than men, and we know that from today as well. For all you men in the audience, recognize all of this in your organizations and be supportive. Imposter syndrome has its roots in childhood, Think of all the times that people offered their opinions to us as children on our schoolwork, sports, hobbies, or even our manners and behaviours. How many times were you told when you said you wanted to be something and they go, nah, you should be something else? Where I'm from in Belturbet and Cavan, people used to say, I want to go to university. And people are like, you're never going to go to university. Why would you want to go to university? You know, you just stay around and work locally. But I did. Remember that we can change the story we tell about ourselves every day, every morning. When you get up in the morning, you think, oh my God, I can't do this or I can't do that. Yes, you can. You've done it before and you will do it again. And that day, you will have something else to think about when you did it again. We experience the world from the inside out. We are aware of our own vulnerability, but not the vulnerability of others. And again, for the men in the audience, when you do see women that you work with and they might be in a vulnerable state or they might think they've got imposter syndrome, please be aware that this is what they think. Feelings do not equal facts. Just because we feel like an imposter, it doesn't make us an imposter. We should be learning all the time. If we're not learning, then we are not living. Apply for the job you don't know the 30% of. Just because we are learning doesn't mean we are imposters or not good enough. So when you do get the job and you've still got 30% or 40% of that job, you're not an imposter. You're learning. Everybody was learning at some stage. Good is better than perfect. You all deserve to hit whatever your own glass ceiling is, and everyone's glass ceiling is different. Just because somebody wants to be something or go somewhere and do something, not everybody wants or shares the same things as what they want to achieve. And appreciate that and acknowledge it. Let's all strive for good and also goodness instead of perfection and do it all together. Thank you very much.